Good evening, everybody. It is Friday. Hope you are ready for the weekend. It's been so nice to be home with my family the past few days, but we have to fit in a Courtroom Insider tonight because the trial is just days away. And I'm headed back to Arizona tomorrow. I'll be there through the weekend, and then we'll be live Sunday night for another Courtroom Insider. By the way, I'm Nate Eaton. Thanks for watching. For those of you who are brand new here, we are talking anything and everything about Lori Vallow Daybell's case in Arizona. And tonight, we have a really special edition because I'm basically turning the program over to you. Earlier this week, I asked if you had questions for Special Prosecutor Rachel Smith. Rachel Smith helped prosecute Lori Vallow's case in Idaho 2 years ago this month. It was originally a death penalty case, and then it got taken off the table. We're going to talk about that here in a minute with Rachel. And so many of you submitted questions about this case in Arizona. I have 2 pages of questions here. We're going to go through about her case in Idaho, about other cases she's prosecuted, all sorts of stuff. It's going to be a Q&A hour that hopefully I hope you'll find really insightful. And without wasting any more of your time, let's jump into my conversation. Joining me now, Rachel Smith. All right, Rachel, we have a lot of questions here, and we're just going to buzz through them. I'm going to ask these going down the list, and we'll be glad to hear your answers. First of all, Glenn asks, because Lori is representing herself, can that make it easier for her to appeal later on the grounds that she didn't know what she was doing, or that her legal counsel didn't advise her correctly, even though she might not have followed their instructions?
When a person represents themselves, goes pro se, it doesn't actually make their appeals easier as long as the court has done a really good record of that's an informed choice they're making, that they're not being coerced, that they are competent. Lori Vallow has had multiple people evaluate her, find her competent to proceed. You're allowed to represent yourself, and you can't then complain that you had a bad lawyer. If you're a bad lawyer and you represent yourself, it's on you.
Okay. Diane says, how difficult is it to prosecute a case that is years old?
It is difficult to prosecute a case that is years old. Age is not the friend of the state or the victims. So the older the case, the harder it is to put together. And that's where having really solid law enforcement who does interviews of witnesses that can refresh their recollection is extremely important, that they collect the evidence at or near the time that it's discovered. That makes it possible, but age is not a friend of the state.
Yeah, so I would imagine that the fact that they have those text messages that have not changed, the
Yes.
phone calls to 911 that haven't changed, all of that has got to help the prosecution.
Yeah, when there's forensic evidence that's been preserved, like the text between Lori and Alex and Lori and Chad and Lori and many people, that lives forever. So forensic evidence, physical evidence, when it's obtained at the time by law enforcement, that lives forever. The challenge comes in eyewitness testimony and memory. But if their statements are recorded, you can help them refresh their memory. And a lot of people, once they see themselves or hear themselves talking, they begin to remember things.
That goes along with the next question of when Lori was the only witness still living at the place where Charles was shot. How hard is that when you have one person around and she's not the most honest, you could say?
Yeah. With Lori being the only one still surviving, it can complicate things, but realistically, so many things were recorded. The statements she made, the statements between her and Alex come in under what they call a statement of a co-conspirator, because if the prosecution could show that people were conspiring, you get those statements in, even if you don't call the co-conspirator to trial. So while it is a challenge, it candidly happens in a lot of murder cases where there were only 2 people in the room. One of them's dead, one of them survives, and you have to put the case together around them. And that's exactly what Maricopa's going to do in this case. Lori left a trail of evidence. Alex left a trail of evidence. Chad left a trail of evidence, and Maricopa's going to put that in.
Okay. An anonymous person says, what is different about Lori's case versus other homicides that you have prosecuted?
I think the extensive media coverage is the difference between Lori's case and other homicides I've handled. I have handled cases that had high publicity. Most of my career was in and around the city of St. Louis, and I was in the circuit attorney's office, which handled a lot of the violent crime in St. Louis. So a lot of coverage was given to murders by the local reporters. I've also had some cases at a national level as well. But Lori's, it was so pervasive. And the other piece was the public interest, the number of people in the community or nationwide, worldwide, that I've never seen before. So that those presence, sort of those citizen journalists, really, I think helped because it helped people focus on who was taken, but it hurt because it subjected the witnesses to intense scrutiny and made some of them very reluctant to come forward.
Mm. Remind people, Rachel, how many homicide cases you've prosecuted over the years?
I don't know. Oh, hundreds. I really don't know. I handled my first homicide in 1994, went of a shaken baby case, sadly. And then I've handled several, I mean, in terms of trials, I've tried some pretty much every year since then. And then I've handled scores more. Um, I was also what they call a special prosecutor for the Attorney General for the state of Missouri, where you traveled the state and tried cases in rural parts of the state, sort of like Madison County, one murder every 50-year type places. And so I handled a ton and put them together, and vast majority of homicides plead, but really only when they're ready to plead, and then tried. I don't. I can sit down and look at a list, but I've handled hundreds.
Wow. Okay, Anna wants to know why the death penalty was taken off in Lori's case in Idaho.
And the death penalty was taken off for Lori Vallow because the court, Judge Boyce, found that the state hadn't turned over fast enough a bulk amount of evidence. I got to be careful because some of the order is sealed, but I think that piece is public, and that it was too, not that we hadn't, but that we turned it over too close to trial. And so the state was in a position where we had to make the choice. Do we challenge that ruling, which we could have, or do we go forward and keep the trial date? Rob and Lindsay talked about it a lot. I'm confident they also talked to the victims' families. But in the end, the decision was not to challenge Judge Boyce's decision. We respected it, disagreed with it respectfully, but decided to go forward and not challenge that because in the end, the goal was to hold Lori accountable. And candidly, in the judge taking it off the table, now at this point, we don't have all those appeals. So there's some advantages to it being off the table.
Right. Whereas Chad Daybell did get death penalty, there will be decades of appeals most likely, and
Yeah.
it'll
Yeah.
continue to come up. And because of that evidence not being turned over, didn't her defense argue that they didn't have enough time to do mitigation? Therefore, they were, unless Lori agreed to continue, which she did not want to do, they
Right.
were kind of stuck too.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The defense argued that the information they needed to review, they felt they needed a lot more time if they were going to use it as mitigation evidence in that sentencing part, the second part of their trial. And since they didn't have time to review it, the court decided to exclude it rather when Ms. Vallow Daybell said she did not want to continue it. So you're absolutely right.
Do you think she would have gotten the death penalty?
I do think she would have gotten the death penalty. Um, it is harder to get the death penalty statistically on women, but the evidence of Lori's um, manipulation, we would have gotten in at penalty phase more details on Charles' death. We would have gotten in details, way more details on Brandon Boudreaux. We would have gotten in statements she had made by Tylee and JJ. Kay or Larry Woodcock would have testified about the impact and the loss. You would have heard from Tammy Daybell's family about who was taken. You would have heard a lot of sort of character evidence, which for Lori would not have reflected well. And we were ready for penalty phase with a psych expert to help people understand the difference between someone who is mentally ill and hyper religiosity and somebody who uses religion as a tactic or a
Mm.
manipulation tool. And that expert was somebody who had also been involved in analyzing things in the Elizabeth Smart case. And so that he was a prosecutor who helped, he was a forensic psychologist who helped people sort of in that case for the federal prosecutors understand that Mitchell, the defendant, was using religion as a tool and a tactic to control Elizabeth Smart. And he really is helpful for the prosecution to help the jury see religion that Chad and Lori used as they were manipulative tools. They weren't closely held beliefs.
That would have been fascinating to hear.
It
That's
would have been
unfortunate.
fascinating. Yeah.
Okay, next we have from Holly. I'm a mom and a non-traditional law student. I take the bar exam next February. What do you do to balance your life and be an effective prosecutor and also a mom? Do you have hard and fast time boundaries for yourself? I imagine a case like Daybell will take as much time as you give it. You're an inspiration. Thank you.
That's very sweet. Well, thank you. Balance is a work in progress. I think of it more like a roller coaster rather than balance. There are times that I have to focus, and my kids understand that. My work as a prosecutor is a choice I make. I came up really believing in wanting to support victims and seeking justice for people and helping support law enforcement. I went into law and prosecution because I'd had a family member killed by a drunk driver and the impact that it has on family. So I share that because my kids know and understand where I'm coming from. So when I'm in trial, they understand that, I'm working on this for helping other people, helping try to get the right thing done for somebody who's been harmed. But when I'm not in trial, yeah, I try to be done by 6. We, at least until the kids got, a little older, we ate dinner together every night as family, even if it was takeout from Taco Bell, so we always ate together. I dropped the kids off. I made sure that if my son was involved in scouts, we were actively involved. And so those times, weekends, my husband and I were very involved with scouts. So we made sure that the events that were important to my kids, my daughter's involved with color guard. We attend her events. We get her to the practice. We support the band boosters. So we just made sure that those things that are important to them and our family happened and that my kids understood why I was doing what I was doing.
During the trial, did you have an escape? Did you block out a few hours every night to not work, or was it all work?
I did not. That was during trial, you're on. And the idea that you can turn it off when you're in a trial, especially a trial like Vallow Daybell, let me turn that off. Just one moment. I didn't hi on my daughter's
Speaking
home.
of kids, yes.
Speaking of kids, okay. I need you not to leave, just to keep it quiet. You want to take him somewhere? Okay, thanks, then. I apologize. I thought I hadn't put my sign on the door to warn her that I was
Oh, that's
doing
okay.
an interview.
No,
So
my daughter will probably come running in here any minute.
that's all good. That's all good. So I know my daughter Waverly is really good at she's good at priorities and she loves the puppy, so life is good.
Right.
So I apologize. So we were talking about
When in Boise during the trial, it was all the time. It was no, downtime to go on a hike or whatever.
no, there was no what I did make sure we did when I say what I made sure that we did was my family and I talked or dropped zoomed every night. even if it was 5 minutes, because it was my son's junior year, it was my daughter's freshman year in high school. So we Zoomed every night, talked to my husband in the mornings before on my way to the courthouse and at night. That's what kept me grounded, but they knew and understood and supported what I was doing. The kids, my daughter in particular, had watched some of the Dateline. They were older, they're not little. And so she felt an affinity for JJ and Tylee. Tylee's about the same age as her, couple of years difference. And so they were very supportive. And then they flew out and came and saw me a couple times.
Oh,
So
nice.
the weekends that they were there, I mean, they did get to come see the courthouse. They, not during trial, but they also saw where I was staying. I was in an Airbnb with one of my colleagues. We split a house. So we were able to get, family is most important to me. And I was able to keep grounded with my family. That's what mattered.
Awesome. Okay. Mimi says, did you seek help through counseling? Because how could you see the things you see and still be okay?
I'm a firm believer in counseling. I believe that that they are a huge asset. I did not, and I have not, but part of that is because I have a really strong family support system, both with my immediate family, my husband, my kids. But I also have a large extended family who spend a lot of time checking in with me. I have a good, solid friend network as well. And I have friends who are really pretty candid with me, fellow prosecutors or former prosecutors who will be like, hey, you need to take a break. So I believe in counseling. I think it's the right thing to do, but I also have been blessed with people who can help me remember that what I'm looking at is not the vast majority of the world, that it's the exception, which is why it's in court.
And obviously, if you felt you needed to go to counseling, you would go.
Oh, I would go, absolutely. And I have people who would absolutely say, what are you doing for you? And who would hold me accountable. I mean, there's no, and I've done that for friends. So I believe firmly in counseling. If I thought I needed that additional outlet, that additional work, I would do it. I just haven't been there yet.
Okay. Diane says, how do you determine who goes up for the death penalty? As in Chad and Lori's case, one went for death, one did not. You kind of answered that. But when, let's say in general, when you're, pursuing charges against, excuse me, when you're pursuing something, how do you decide? Let's do death.
Uh, so the way typically I will, whether I recommend or ask for the death penalty, it will turn on the facts of the case and the background of the defendant. So the facts of the case where there's multiple people killed, somebody's tortured, they kill a police officer, they kill a judge, they kill a prosecutor. They show a depraved sense of mind. That is one of the many factors you look at. Like, how did these people die? What conduct did this person have? Do they have prior convictions for violent offenses? That is one factor. And you look at that and you make a decision. Are the elements, the factors you need to show that it's kind of murder plus present? So a prosecutor can't just file the death penalty on any murder case. It has to be like murder plus, it's a murder happened plus something else that makes it unique. I also sit back and I firmly believe that you should always reach out to the defense and say, what mitigation is there? Is there strong evidence that somebody has a long history of mental illness? Is there evidence that they were physically or sexually abused in their youth? Not as an excuse, but in terms of mitigation. And if that evidence is present, then I will often suggest to the prosecutor, or if I'm making the decision, choose not to, because the death penalty, in my mind, is for very limited circumstances. It's for the worst of the worst. And it's something where it's the only appropriate outcome. Believe it or not, I'm not a huge proponent of the death penalty. I believe it should be used sparingly. It should be used in those exception cases where the evidence of aggravation, either through what he or she, what they did, how they did it, and their background means it's the only right outcome.
Mm. Okay, next we have Debbie. She says if Lori decides not to take the stand and subject herself to cross-examination by the state, but uses her role as a defense attorney to basically testify from the podium without being crossed by the state, can or will the court instruct her not to use the podium as a witness stand?
Lori and many pro se defendants often try to get their testimony out through their questions, through the speeches they give, through the intros they give to questions. So that is a very common tactic. That happens a lot. And then they choose not to testify because they've already had their say. But an experienced judge will cut the person off and say, now is not the time for questions. Now is not the time for, a speeches. That is not an appropriate form of the question. So yeah, Lori may try that, but I believe there's already been some evidence that this judge will appropriately, fairly rein her in when she's trying to do that.
Yeah, the other day when she introduced herself to the jury, she started to kind of give her life story. I'm 51, and the judge immediately said, ma'am, defendant, whatever, Miss Daybell, now's for questioning,
Oh.
not to testify. So I imagine there will be some back and forth with that as the trial goes on, and she may try to push as much as she can to get that in.
Yeah, I think you're right. That Lori will try to work that in.
Along the same vein of her being her own attorney, Rebecca says if Lori is her own attorney, why is she allowed to have advisory counsel sitting next to her? Darrell Brooks v. Wisconsin, Darrell Brooks v. in Wisconsin represented himself, and he did not have anyone sitting next to him.
That's a legal concept called standby counsel. Lori has standby counsel. This judge, as a lot of judges, when somebody chooses to go pro se, you'll hear them really caution the person against doing it. I will often, if somebody tries to go pro se, I'll file a motion asking the judge to order somebody to be standby counsel. It's a way to protect the record. It's a way to protect your trial. And the court appoints it because that way, if the person in the middle of the trial says, hey, I want my own lawyer, which has happened, well, they've been there the whole time. They just take over. I had a case where the individual did what's called a demur, where they remained silent the entire trial, and he didn't want standby counsel, even though he had access to an extremely experienced defense attorney through the public defender system. And the court agreed with my motion and appointed standby counsel. They told standby counsel, you can't do anything, you can't say anything. But if Mr. Hollis wants you, then you will step in. And that the Court of Appeals in Missouri found that that was absolutely the right call, because the fear was halfway through the trial, they will realize, hey, wait a minute, I'm in over my head. And then the court's in the position of forcing him to go forward without a lawyer. So it's a great appellate call that the judge made, helping keep this trial date, helping make sure that Ms. Daybell's rights are protected. And the snippets I've seen, it looks like at times Lori's talking to the person and they're chatting, right? So she's getting legal advice to help her form. So while it may seem frustrating, it's the right thing to do long-term to protect any conviction.
She definitely is consulting with them, at all times. And the judge has said, should she decide to say, Your Honor, I want to step back as the chief, those guys can take over, but she can't return back to her being the lead. She's got to be with those guys. Okay, so Gary says, what were things like behind the scenes on the prosecution team in Lori's Idaho case?
Things were real. Rob Wood is one of the most honorable, high integrity people I have ever met. His team, and the partners in Fremont, they're incredible people. Rob's team, Mackenzie Cole, Spencer Rammel, Jody Thurber, like Eva, that team, when they realized these kids were missing, all of them like put their own lives on hold, like they were working Thanksgiving. And so it's hard not to really walk away knowing how what incredible people they are. So even if there were times we all disagreed and there were some strong disagreements and strong personalities, you knew where they were coming from. And so I think it's hard to do a case like this and not walk away knowing how incredible people were. And I was able to, even when things were tough and it's 2 in the morning and we're looking at jury questionnaire 1200 and you're exhausted, um, I was able to go, okay, but these guys have been in it from the beginning. Does that make sense? And you were able to kind of take that step back. And while we were in trial, Rob's team, the whole team, really put the case first, really put check their ego on Lori's case and did what was right. So yeah, there were disagreements. Of course there were. There were strategic calls that had to be made. There was a mountain of work that had to be done. And late nights lead to sometimes disagreements, sometimes debates, arguments. But in the end, everybody was able to check it, put it where it belonged, which is nowhere near the courtroom, and get the evidence done. So it was a privilege to work with that team.
You got the result that you were hoping for.
Absolutely got the result that we were hoping for.
Okay, PJ says, Rachel, what's the one thing you learned during the Lori Daybell trial? Did anything surprise you?
The one thing I learned or remembered was how much of a sacrifice law enforcement and prosecutors have to make in order to hold people accountable. The hundreds of hours, it just reminded me in a deeper way how incredibly hard a lot of law enforcement works, a lot of the prosecutors work. Um, and that's a huge takeaway on this, that the um what people had to do to get this done behind the scenes is an inspiration. I wish the taxpayers, the citizens, could see what quality people they had in all of Ron Ball's team, all of Doug Hart's team, all of the prosecution team. It that will always, I will always walk away seeing that depth of commitment, seeing that hard work, seeing the absolute desire to kind of put yourself aside and just hold these murderers accountable. That's an inspiration.
Leah says, what's been the most bizarre case you've worked on other than Daybell?
Oh, wow. I've worked a few bizarre cases. That's what you do as a special prosecutor for the Attorney General. I had a murder committed on Halloween, where everybody was wearing Satan masks and tried to use a crossbow. Um, I've had probably the one of the most graphics and the one that hit hard, it still hits hard, is where three women who always went by their street names, Tiny, Unladylike, and Baby Doll, tortured and killed a state's witness, while the murderer, who she was going to testify against, listened over the jail phone. What Danielle went through, um, oh, those are pictures that get me. It's kind of like that. I've seen a lot of homicides and you always react, but there are some that the images of JJ, the images of Tylee, there's just a reaction, that you human, what happened to those kids. Same thing as with Danielle Montgomery. What happened to her, I mean, what they did to her was pretty awful. Um, Tiny, Charlene Franklin flipped and went state's evidence. She's probably, I'm looking at the date, she's probably eligible for parole now. Uh, and Tiny had some cognitive processing issues. So, Unladylike is in prison, Crystal Barsh, she's in prison for the rest of her life. Baby Doll, Charity White. She's in prison for the rest of her life. And that one is like Tylee and JJ. They just what they did to her and the torture they put her through so that he could hear her scream was just something
Mm.
that you don't forget.
And did he get life?
He got life. He was already in. She was going to testify against him for a murder robbery he had done. And so he got life plus he got a second life. They were convicted him because that case was tried by a different prosecutor. I handled the cases with the women. Um, but they got life against him, and then Tiny, Unladylike, and Baby Doll all were convicted, and two of them are still in prison.
Man. Kim wants to know if you could talk to Lori, what would you ask her?
I would love, I've changed my mind over the time. I would love to talk to her. I would ask her, I would ask her why she didn't just give the kids to Kay. I know the answer to that. She needed the money. They were about a paycheck. But I would ask her about that. I would ask her, really, Chad? I mean, I, I know that's probably petty and childish, but Chad, you're like for Chad? Um, I wouldn't expect Lori to answer, but I would love the opportunity. I think most prosecutors, when you step back and think about it, you would love the opportunity to talk to the defendants, and that actually very rarely happens.
Chelsea asks, we've heard some of the jail calls, but not the others. What is in the others?
Oh, there are hundreds and hundreds of jail calls. The essential ones relevant to the case are there. A lot of the jail calls are about what they're going to do when they get out. When I say they, Chad and Lori, what they're going to do when they get out. Lots of conversations about Chad's phone calls are about, with his kids and what's going on in their kids' lives. And it's also what he was going through. A lot of it towards the end, I think both Chad and Lori was stuff they knew we were listening. They wanted us to hear, they repeated their defenses. So a lot of it was sort of regurgitation of what they wanted law enforcement to hear, but a lot of it was planning for their future when they got away with this.
In relation to that, Eliza, did Lori or Chad ever talk about Nate Eaton or the media coverage in their conversations? Do you think they were looking for media attention?
They did. They talked about media, not a ton, but they did talk about media. I don't remember if they mentioned Nate Eaton specifically, but I know, I think Lori did. There was frustration that the media was getting it wrong, that it was not being covered fairly. But I really believe that they thought they were going to be able to sell their story later. So, I've always believed that they had a plan to try to sell things to the media later, which is
You mean
why
like for actual money, like go out and make money?
yeah, I've always believed that they were going to actually try to sell their story. And there was even discussion somewhere about, who has rights to things. So, yeah, they followed it. They worried about it, and a lot. What I remember, and probably Ray Hermosillo or Chuck Consitis would be better because they listened to all of them. Um, they worried that the media was getting it wrong.
Marianne, why did the prosecution want cameras out of the courtroom in Idaho? Aren't they working for the people? What are your thoughts on cameras in the courtroom?
Um, Cameras do work for the people, and I understand that. But I can tell you, having tried cases with both cameras in and cameras out, everybody behaves differently. Um, it, it affects witnesses' willingness to come forward. It affects willingness of witnesses to be detailed. they worry about people finding them. Cameras in the courtroom actually make the prosecutor's jobs harder in my mind, because people become so worried about playing to the camera, that you have to factor that in when you're prepping your witness, when you're dealing with your judges, and when you're dealing with the defense. And I think you saw this early on with Rob, when Rob and Spencer and Mackenzie were doing some of the prelim and doing some of the early part of the case. I went back and watched some of those that old coverage. That to me, it was very clear the defense there, not counsel, not Jim or John, but original counsel, they were playing to the cameras. There was no question in my mind that John Pryor and Mark Means and all those guys, they were absolutely playing to the cameras. That makes the state's job harder, because they go after those 30-second sound bites because they're looking for some reporter to pick it up, rather than the actual law or the rulings. Unfortunately, Judge Boyce wasn't a judge that was super susceptible to it. So the court in this case was even-handed and good about it, but I've seen other judges maybe not do that, and that's a huge problem.
Well, I will say in this case in Arizona, no one will notice a camera in there. There's an actual media room at the very back of the courtroom that has a glass window that's kind of tinted, and the light's off in there, and the camera is actually shooting through the glass.
Wow.
That's why, for those of you wondering, why are we only seeing back of heads? Because of that. And from what I understand, the Jodi Arias trial changed everything in Arizona. They used to be able to have multiple cameras, but that became a whole thing of its own. So,
Okay, next we have from Val. What would happen if you believe the other side of a case is leaking information or revealing their strategy to the public rather than keeping things confidential?
Um, that happens all the time. In fact, there's been a lot of discussion in law schools, and I've actually been working on putting together a course for one of the local law schools on how no comment is no longer protecting your client's rights. So it has become a tactic for, especially in the civil world, for the high profile civil litigants. They have in-house communications teams. So it happens. And so this is where really following the rules, being very mindful of your pleadings, what's in there, making sure that what's in there is evidence you can get in. Detailed pleadings become more of the norm. And what I mean by that is the documents we file with the judge are called a pleading. And you can either write one sentence or 5. If the other side is leaking things, either in violation of a gag order or they're maneuvering somebody, your pleadings become more detailed. Because that way we know the public at least gets to hear your say. There was a time, and there's probably some old school lawyers, if they ever watch this, who I'll get hate mail and tell me that that's the wrong thing to tell people to do. But the idea that we can go back to no comment, that there's going to be no coverage, that nobody's going to pay attention in the day and age of social media and YouTube is fiction. And I sadly these days, if I'm dealing with a certain level of high caliber lawyer, I know they're going to be talking to the press behind the scenes. I don't approve it. I don't like it. If I need to, I'll get a gag order, but and you have to respond by pleadings, bringing it to the attention of the judge, and making sure you're protecting your own client's rights. Was that too long-winded, Nate?
No, that was perfect.
Okay.
By the way, I could elaborate on each of these questions, but
I know you could. I know you could.
Peggy says, do you listen to or watch true crime cases on your off time, or have you had enough of that with the job you have?
Occasionally I will. I'm human, and I really love forensic evidence. I'm very interested in the topic, but no, I don't. I live true crime. My world is, I'm helping prosecutors in another state right now on a backlog of 80 murders. So when I am done for the day, my daughter and I right now are watching Handmaid's Tale. So we watch something else or we do something else. I'm a big genealogy person, so I will do that. I do not go deep into a lot of true crime, although I have started to watch Kohberger a little closer because how why
That's,
not?
that's one of our questions, actually.
Yeah.
We'll jump to that one. Someone says, I'd like to know your thoughts on Kohberger's case.
Boy, that's a fascinating case. Those guys, I think we've seen a fraction of the evidence that's out there, by design. He is clearly a, I don't want to say, I hate using some of the psych terms. He is clearly a person who set out to murder multiple people. He clearly is somebody who had murder in his heart when he walked in that house. So it's going to be interesting to see how the multi-state, multi-nation, across the nation case is put together. And it's hard not to get fascinated by Kohberger. His ego and his arrogance. I think he thought he wouldn't get caught and he didn't cover his tracks like you would have expected somebody of his background to do. We're going to see a lot of digital evidence. We're going to see a lot of electronic evidence in this case, and it's because he was arrogant.
And we are seeing a little bit more and more with these new filings that come out, that are kind of jaw-dropping. And as you mentioned, it's a fraction because when the trial actually comes, there'll be more. Um, Next we have Amy. Why did you leave Chad's case right before the trial?
I left Chad's case right before the trial because there was a lot of stuff going on in my home life. There was also a background of the team that the team was getting expanded. I was asked to stay on when I said I wanted to leave. I was asked by both Lindsay and law enforcement and Rob. But given the expansion of the team, given the workload, given the focus in Chad's case, I believed for me personally, it was the right choice to step back. And in the end, they were able to get the AG's help and get the conviction. So it was the right call for myself personally and for everybody involved.
So we already asked that one. Smithfield says, have you ever witnessed an execution? Would you want to?
I have not. I have had the first death penalty that I got as first chair was a guy by the name of John Smith, who tortured and stalked and abused every woman who'd ever been in his life. And he killed the victim and her stepfather when she took that step away from him and then tried to kill her mother. Excuse me just a second. And he then took her baby and laid it at her feet so she would know what she was missing. And then the victim, Brandy, wrote in her own blood, it was John. I heart Tatum, her baby. Like in that case, and we had there were so many ex parte orders of protection against him. It was classic domestic violence offender who every woman, it got worse and worse and worse in terms of his need for control. I was given the opportunity to attend his execution. It was 2003 or four, maybe five. And I chose not to. As I said, I believe the death penalty is appropriate for the worst of the worst. I believe should be the exception rather than the rule. I'm not a huge proponent of it. When people are willing to come in, accept responsibility, and plead and go away for the rest of their life so they're not hurting the general public again, I'm fine with that. So I don't feel the need to watch the execution. I don't feel the need to attend. And in the situations where I've gotten the death penalty, should any of them get an execution date, I will not attend. I did not attend John Smith's, and I don't intend to go to others.
And we have a couple more. Darcy says, what is one thing you look forward to after a long day of work?
What I look forward to with a long day of work, I have an amazing husband. I like spending time with him. 20 plus years later, we're pretty lucky to be together. He's as hard or harder worker than I am. So I look forward to that downtime with my husband. I really love the time with my kids. We're a family who pays attention to local and state and national politics. So there's a healthy debate that goes on in the house about various things because we have the full range of the spectrum on there in the house. So I look forward to time with my kids and my family.
So that's good that you can talk with them about other things than crime
Yeah,
and
yeah,
courts and whatnot.
yeah. In fact, I don't often share my day with them. In fact, they're often surprised when they're like, wait, that's your case? I'm like, yeah, that's
Right.
my, yeah.
L. Bingham says, what should we pay attention to in this case with Lori?
I think the testimony of Detective Duncan is going to be fascinating. I suspect he's going to be used in the same way as Doug Hart was in Idaho. Um, the forensic evidence and the medical examiner's evidence and the crime scene evidence is going to be what is going to be a huge factor. The angle and the trajectory of those bullets completely undermine any self-defense argument. So I would pay attention again to the digital evidence, the text, the iCloud probably is going to come in through Nate Duncan, and then the medical examiner and the forensic evidence from the scene.
Kelly,
Did you know about the Daybell case before you were hired? Had you seen the video of them in Hawaii looking smug and arrogant?
I did know about the Daybell case before I was hired. I didn't know much about it. I knew about it because I knew some of the people who had been helping in a supporting role of Rob um, on sort of a communications level. So I knew some details, but I did not follow it closely. And it was only after I was hired, I went back and started looking at the evidence, but then I also watched the Dateline, Mommy Doomsday.
and our last question, a lot of questions, Rachel. So that's great. Eric says, what do you think of media coverage and bloggers and YouTubers who sensationalize very serious cases with real people? You kind of spoke about that earlier, but do you have any additional thoughts about, the internet being open now to everybody to say anything and show anything?
I think the people who do it fair and balanced and cover, I don't have any problem with. I think the people who cover things in a way that respects victims, respects law enforcement, respects suspects and defendants, I applaud. I have zero problem as the government with somebody watching me and holding me accountable because that's the job, right? I should be able to do things that people look at and scrutinize, and it should withstand scrutiny. The people who target people, the people who demonize people, especially before there's a conviction, those are the ones I have concerns with. So that's a little bit all over the place, but I believe in a healthy, robust public review of what the government is doing. And if part of that means we have to let vloggers and bloggers and YouTubers do it, then we do. We just find a way to make sure that it doesn't affect the courtroom.
I just thought of one more question I didn't ask.
Sure,
It's
sure.
from Nate. You questioned Doug Hart over all the stuff that was found on the iCloud in
Yeah,
the first trial, in Lori's trial. And one of the parts of the testimony dealt with the phrase the storm,
yeah.
referring to Chad's private parts. Do you remember when your team learned that, what that meant? Was there debate over whether to let that part in? Clearly, it was memorable and effective and the most tweeted thing that I put out there during the trial. And also, did you kind of prep Doug like, hey, I'm going to ask you this, be ready?
Yeah. I don't think I learned it in work with Doug and at one of the monthly team meetings. We had monthly meetings as a team, both law enforcement and prosecution. We both got together and met. Early on, it was by Zoom. As we got closer to trial, it was in person in Rexburg. And so I know one of the early on meetings, I learned of that. And at first people, it's kind of salacious, it's a little funny. And there were some who said, well, it'll never come in because it's too prejudicial. And I'm like, no. And when we settled on our case theme, the way we packaged it, I'm like, we have to get that in. There was some discussion on it. Judge Boyce isn't going to let it in. I'm like, nah, he's going to let it in. So Doug Hart, and I know you've interviewed him and I know he's been on here, is one of the most professional, like in the old days, if there'd been a dictionary with FBI, Doug Hart's picture is going to be there, right? He's a Fed. He's professional. He doesn't crack poker face, and candidly, he doesn't crack poker face even in team meetings. Like a very deep guy, lots going on, robust life as a family member. All of these guys are incredible family members. Like, so there's some depth there, but Doug, you weren't like, he was the voice of reason many times when there was a debate between the prosecutors and the law enforcement, or prosecutors and each other, or law enforcement and each other. Doug was often the voice of reason. He was leadership for the FBI. Ron Ball was leadership for the Rexburg PD. So getting Doug to say that was interesting. So we prepped. He worked extremely hard. I don't know how many hundreds of hours he must have spent. And then he and I spent a lot of time, me refining how I ask him questions, because a prosecutor's job is to ask questions in a way that made sense to the witness, so that they could tell their truth. And so he and I spent a lot of time doing that. And in one of the prep sessions when I said, I'm going to ask you, and he just kind of looked at me, because he's also kind of a conservative guy, kind of looked at me, he's like, no, you're not. I'm like, oh yeah, I am, Doug. And I'm not sure, he just looked at me in a very stoic, Fed way. And I'm like, I'm going to ask you. I'm not sure he believed me. So that morning, when we got to that part in the outline, I just looked at him and I could see the look on his face. She's going to ask me. He doesn't crack demeanor. But I knew him. And Ray Hermosillo, and I'm pointing because in the courtroom he was over to my left, right? He knew it was coming. And so I said, so, in your review of the iCloud and your investigative analysis, did you have an opinion on what the word storm meant? And I could just see it just flicker across Doug's face. And he said the answer. Well, we took a break a little bit after that, and Ray Hart came up. He's like, that was probably the highlight of my life. You got Doug Hart to talk about Chad's penis. So yeah, and there were moments like that. And I don't want to make it sound like we were very jocular. We weren't, but there were times you have to see the humor in the situation. And these guys, Chuck Consitis and, Mike Douglas and all, Dave Stubb, and Doug Hart, and Ray, they'd all lived this for years, and it meant so much to them. So, and they were willing to sit through hours of work and prep. And so Doug was an exceptional professional, but the look kind of flickered across that federal poker face, and I will never forget that.
And those of us in the courtroom had no idea what was coming, because there were so many different terms throughout the trial that you didn't know what they meant. And was this code word? So when he said it, I think it caught many people like, oh, okay.
Right.
And it took on a whole new meaning. Well, Rachel, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for answering all these questions. And I imagine we'll be calling on you again as the trial progresses.
Great. Thank you. And do we ever get to do Q&A with you?
Ask me the questions?
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know. Maybe we'll have to do that.
I think we should. I think, you know what? And I think I could probably get Rob to do it with me.
Oh, that'd be something.
Ray,
yeah. That'd be something. I think I could do it. You guys I would much prefer to ask than answer. But...
I'm 1,000% with you, but yeah. I do think there's some real value in there. So think about it. It would be kind of fun.
I don't know. What do you think? Should we do a Q&A with me? I say all the time, I don't really have much to say. It's everybody else that I interview that has the cool things to say. I just, show up and do my job. Big thanks to Rachel for doing that, for chatting with me and being open to answering anything. She said, yeah, they can ask anything. And that's what I sent. Any questions? So also thanks to you for watching. Here is where you can find me in case you don't know. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, X, and I'm on YouTube. And you can subscribe to our YouTube channel because you will want to watch the trial. Here is the schedule of no matter where you're at in America, and you'll have to figure out the time change on the world. Go to Google and find it out about where and how you can watch the trial on our East Idaho News YouTube channel. I know I say this every night. You're like, quit talking about it. But I get emails every day from people that are like, how do I watch the trial? Also, here's where you can follow my written updates that will start on Monday. So I'll be ready. My wrists are getting a nice break as I've been here in Idaho the past few days. And before we go, I have to thank our sponsor of Courtroom Insider, Alan Browning from Browning Law. They are sponsoring Courtroom Insider during this trial, and we appreciate their support of East Idaho News. And we will be back here Sunday night to take a look ahead at what we can expect next week. Opening statement's going to be a big day on Monday as the trial with Lori Vallow Daybell begins in Arizona. Everybody, I hope you have a great weekend. Enjoy the time, and we will see you back here Sunday night. Thanks for watching.